When we talk about proportion in drawing, we're talking about the relationship between certain size elements of what we're doing, as in the relationship between the height and the width of this facade. Drawing freehand, particularly drawing freehand directly in ink where we can't erase any mistakes or make any adjustments, means proportion is always a challenge. Let me show what happens with a very common way of approaching a drawing such as this, but highlighting the issue that it's so easy to end up with. So we look at the front and we think, okay, so we've got this box here. So we draw the box and we think, okay, it has these pilasters, these squared columns at the ends, and then it's divided up into two more spaces. And now we have a section down the base where we have windows and the door. And we have two lots of windows on top. And then we have some square windows and then we have this pediment. These sped up drawing sections are sped up to 4 times my actual drawing speed. If you want to see them slower, you can use the cog icon that YouTube provides. And here we have it. Now, unfortunately, no matter how well we choose to do the details, we can't escape the fact that our proportions are wrong. This very first box that I drew to contain the building had the relative sizing of the width being narrower than the height. If we look at our reference more carefully, we can see that it's not even a square, but in fact, the width is wider than the height. When we talk about proportion, we're talking about this relationship between various sides and angles of our subject. We also have a problem with this pediment where if we compare it to our original, we can see simply that it goes up too high. When we get our overall outside proportions incorrect, it makes it impossible to then add the detail and have the correct shapes and areas left to put in. So for instance here, because this was too tall and narrow, I ended up with narrower shapes to get the effect that we have here. You'll notice that with these windows, in our reference, there's as much space from the window to the pilaster as there is width of the window, but that's not the case here. And that's having drawn narrower windows than we have in our reference. Now, I've exaggerated this a bit to make the point, but the problem is if we don't get this original box shape pretty much in exactly the right proportions, we're not going to be able to divide it and get the right proportions within the divisions so that we can then add the detail that we have. And of course, this beautiful Georgian architecture is a relatively simple subject. There is relatively simple decoration, and yet it's still a challenge. So how do we do this? So how can we draw architecture such as this and not end up making mistakes that we can't correct, that in the end limit the accuracy of everything we go on to draw? How can we draw this without starting by roughing in the large shapes when every line is going to be here at the end? Let me show you the way of thinking and the strategy and the technique I've worked out, which has enabled me to draw some quite complex architectural scenes completely freehand in ink, and in my mind to give me the best chance to keep my proportions all correct, even when there are many smaller elements that need to be fitted in to a larger shape. But we'll keep this a simpler demonstration and we'll go back to our original subject. So let's start with removing this. So instead of trying to draw this large outside shape and keep that accurate, I'm going to start with a smaller shape. I'm actually going to take this shape here. Now this line doesn't represent the width. And I'm going to start with this pilaster. And I want to keep it approximately equal size. Here we have it so far. But now we want to put this mark in. And the question I'm asking myself is this looking the same proportion? Not necessarily the same size, although I am trying to draw it actual size. And now I move upwards. And I don't want this window to become wider than these spaces here. And let me tell you, this is actually my second take on this first part. If you'd like to see what went wrong with my first attempt, I'll show it in the outro. So if you hang on till then. And now we have this square window up the top. Now, we have this decorative band across here that actually comes pretty much on top. We need to now spread our building to the left and to the right. Now, at this stage, we have, if you like, our horizontal alignments. When I do this section and this section, I can align it with what I've already drawn. But what I do need to work out is still the widths, because I do want them all to look the same. So I'm going to put just a dot here where that window is going to be, and then the other side of the window, and that will make the other side of the arch there. And the arch is the same height as this one. And now, this is this. Now I have my width now. I have my horizontal alignment here. And so now I do these other elements, aligning them. And if you're finding this approach I take to maintain proportion interesting or even helpful, then why not hit the like button right now? And that way you can help me out as well. You can see therefore how it becomes easier to draw more accurately faster if we've established a high level of accuracy with our starting point. And let's put the window on for the ground floor. And I'm looking at this shape here to help me position this. So having gone across to the left, we now do the same, working the same principles on the other side. Now with our overall shape, we do want it to be wider than it is tall. And so, do we have that? I think we do. And in fact, there are edges of the building that come out past the pilasters. And now we need to set up the base for the pediment. We need to pay particular attention to how much overhang we have on each side, because this is where the corners are going to go of the pediment, and that's going to affect the proportion. Now we have to be clear of what shape we're looking at. So I'm looking at the shape that's enclosed with this light grey band. I'm not worried about this line under here just yet. So I'm really wanting to see this as a length relative to maybe this. See, to me that looks maybe a little bit more from there to there. So maybe that's more from here to here. Because you see, I've got that. Now, one way I can check is to measure the angle, and that actually comes out pretty close. When we draw long straight lines, always keep our eye focused on the end point, not on the progress of the nib. And now I fit in this. And we'll add this element here. Again, along the idea of keeping proportion, we don't want this to look larger or smaller on our drawing than it looks in life. Despite its apparent simplicity, this is actually not an easy subject proportion-wise, because at a glance it looks like a square. But if we actually compare, so there's the width and here is the height, it is clearly a lot less than a square. What if we perform the same test on our drawing? So I've drawn it slightly larger, at least widthways, and it's slightly larger heightways. So I'm happy with this. We also have to be aware of the width of our pen, of the ink line, because in a sense, every one of these lines takes up no width at all, but every line I do does take up a width, and when we add them across, they create a certain effect. So choosing the right width pen for what we're drawing and how we're drawing it and the size we're drawing it is also helpful in maintaining proportions. While this was a bit of a setup really just to make the point, it does show how to draw more of a square than the rectangle that we have. It does show if we draw a roughly squarish rectangle in portrait mode, that it looks very different to the effect we get when we draw something similar, perhaps a little bit more rectangular, but in landscape. How this sets us up to then have a chance to get the proportions of these shapes and the way they relate to each other correct, that we simply have already lost because we've got the outside proportions incorrect. Now, let me say, this method does require careful observation the whole way through, because I'm looking at these widths and I'm looking to compare the width and alignments and heights of all the other elements. But I found that choosing preferably a central element, architectural element, that I can, in a sense, isolate, but have more chance of observing and capturing accurately with my marks than if I try to draw the outside shape, really works a lot better for me. Why don't you give it a go with just a couple more elements? With a little bit of foliage for contrast, to give context and to pop our building forward, I think we're done. You've never tried to draw freehand keeping proportions in this way, why not give it a go? And if you think this is a good starting point, I'll post this photo on my channel community page so you can have a go. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. I found it fun to draw, and it's a great exercise to use to work on keeping proportions accurate when we draw freehand. Proportions can be an issue when we're learning to draw, but we have to remember we're learning to draw. It can be very helpful, in fact, just to take drawings to a stage where we haven't added all the detail, but we're just working on the proportions, and that we keep doing it until it's right. Let me tell you, this was my first take on this, and I decided that this shape was in fact too narrow for the reference. At this point, it was easy enough to start again. And while I don't recommend starting drawings again, because there's a lot to learn by pushing through, if we make a fundamental mistake, such as a basic proportion, particularly the first basic proportion wrong, then it is going to throw out the visual effect and accuracy of our whole drawing. So in that case, I think it is worth starting again, so I was able to focus on not making this same mistake. Look, I hope this has been informative and helpful, and I hope encouraging you to at least give a go to this technique. It may not suit everyone, but for me, it's been the secret to drawing quite complex architectural scenes freehand, establishing an accurate point, and then moving across, aligning what I'm drawing down here with how it aligns with what I've drawn up here. But really, whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.